Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into something incredibly heavy but absolutely crucial, Dr. Aaron Wheeler's dissertation, The Mind as a Weapon. We're going to unpack how elementary school teachers, people whose whole lives are dedicated to educating kids, are actually using their own minds to prepare for the unthinkable. It's this really fascinating intersection of education, psychology, and, well, survival. So it brings us to this heavy question. How does a teacher prepare for the unthinkable? It's a scenario we all hope never, ever happens. But the reality of our modern world, it means teachers are increasingly carrying the mental burden of active shooter preparedness. Today, we're going to see exactly how they bear that weight, not with physical weapons, but with mental ones. Okay, let's dive into this. Here's a roadmap. We'll look at preparing for the unthinkable, the psychology of survival, take a step inside Truman Elementary, explore the 5 core themes discovered, and finally look at the future of school safety. Section 1. Preparing for the unthinkable, the burden on modern educators. To really grasp this research, we kind of have to look at the evolution of school safety. Following tragedies like Columbine and Sandy Hook, law enforcement totally revamped their tactical responses. But for the classroom teacher, the training hasn't exactly kept pace with the threat. So left with limited formal resources, a lot of educators have just been forced to develop their own internal strategies to bridge that gap. And that brings us to this critical concept, stress inoculation training, or SIT. Think of it like a vaccine, but for your anxiety. By repeatedly exposing yourself to a stressor before a traumatic event actually happens, you help manage your physical and emotional response to it. Because formal tactical active shooter training for teachers is pretty rare or, just too expensive for districts, teachers are basically doing their own informal stress inoculation training. They're using their minds to mentally rehearse worst-case scenarios over and over again. Section 2. The psychology of survival. Building confidence through the mind. So, the crucial point is that surviving a high-stakes crisis doesn't actually begin with physical action. It starts with cognitive preparation. The big theory here is self-efficacy from psychologist Albert Bandura. He theorized that our motivation is deeply rooted in cognitive activity. Basically, the confidence you have in your own abilities directly dictates your success. Putting that into the context of our educators, if a teacher can visualize themselves successfully navigating and surviving a crisis, they are way more motivated and ultimately far more likely to perform effectively when it actually matters. Literally, believing you can survive is the first step to actually surviving. Just look at the stark contrast between an unprepared mind and a rehearsed mind. A total novice in a sudden violent situation, they're going to experience freezing, panic, just overwhelming fear. Their brains simply can't process the trauma fast enough. But an experienced or rehearsed individual, someone who has used mental imagery to pre-plan their response, they actually bypass that freeze response. They move directly into task-focused action. This is a technique police officers, the military, and pro athletes have used for decades. And now, out of sheer necessity, classroom teachers are adopting it too. Section 3. Inside Truman Elementary, Concept to Reality. To ground all this academic data, Dr. Wheeler used a research method called phenomenological exploration. I know, it's a bit of academic jargon, but hear me out, it's absolutely crucial. It just means we aren't looking at cold, hard statistics today. We're not staring at spreadsheets. We're looking at the deeply personal, human, lived experiences of the educators themselves. We want to understand the phenomenon exactly the way they feel it. To get that really intimate understanding, the study zeroed in on a highly selective group. Exactly 10 certified teachers at a school given the pseudonym Truman Elementary. It's a rural school down in Texas, and it gives us this incredibly revealing look straight into the minds of everyday educators who are navigating this modern anxiety. To really humanize this, take a look at this quote from Julie, one of the teachers at Truman. "How can I protect my babies?" You guys, this wasn't just some abstract thought exercise for her. Julie used mental imagery to literally alter her physical classroom. She mentally rehearsed a lockdown, realized her younger students might cry out of fear, and so she specifically started keeping stuffed animals in her room, just to comfort them and keep them quiet during a potential shooter event. It's just a profound example of mental imagery translating into real-world preparation. Section 4. 5 core themes discovered. Unlocking the educator's mind. Let's move to and see how this builds, because this is really the climax of the explainer. Through all these focus groups and interviews with those 10 teachers, Dr. Wheeler unlocked 5 fascinating recurring patterns in how their minds work. We've got the preservation of life, the desire for additional training, constant preparedness, collaboration among staff, and the impact of outside influences. Every single teacher's mental imagery was structured around these interconnected pillars. So let's break them down. Theme 1 is the preservation of life. Now, you might assume the primary human instinct is self-preservation, right? But for these teachers, the ultimate, overwhelming driving force wasn't saving themselves. It was this intense emotional need to ensure their students returned home safely. When they mentally rehearsed a crisis, the image in their mind was always focused on keeping the kids alive. Some even expressed a willingness to sacrifice themselves to do it. That is their core motivation. Theme 2 is the desire for additional training. These teachers overwhelmingly felt that standard baseline lockdown drills, hiding in the dark and staying quiet, they were just insufficient. There was this massive gap between their profound desire to protect their students and their actual physical abilities to do so, and that created a really strong hunger for more realistic, tactical training. They want to be capable, not just compliant. Theme 3 is the state of being always prepared. This mindset forces teachers to constantly evaluate their surroundings. Take Amanda, for example. She described walking into her room and just automatically, mentally calculating her class size against the available hiding spots. Other teachers talked about keeping extra snacks on hand or planning escape routes based on exactly where they were standing at any given minute. It's like a continuous background app running in their minds. Theme 4 focuses on collaboration. Teachers don't just visualize these terrifying scenarios all by themselves. They actively discuss what-if scenarios with their peers. They coordinate. They ask each other, hey, what do we do if we're caught in the cafeteria? What if the lockdown happens while we're out in the gym? They're using shared mental imagery to create these communal defense plans. And the final theme is outside influences. A teacher's mental imagery doesn't just exist in a vacuum. It is heavily shaped by external factors. Teachers noted how their mental rehearsals were influenced by watching media reports of other shootings, or maybe growing up in violent neighborhoods where hypervigilance was just normal, or even having spouses in law enforcement who shared a tactical mindset with them over the dinner table. Literally, everything they absorb shapes the mental scripts they write for themselves. Section 5, the future of school safety, translating imagery into action. And this brilliantly illustrates how we translate this understanding of mental imagery into actionable, real-world improvements. Let's look at the practical implications of different training methods on the psychological well-being of teachers. Teachers who only went through standard lockdown drills, they had baseline awareness, sure, but it often left them with lingering anxiety, because at the end of the day, they still felt kind of helpless. But a few teachers at Truman had participated in a much more intense simulation called the Defender program. By introducing realistic, stress-inducing scenarios, this training provided high-stress inoculation. It profoundly increased their self-efficacy. Because they had practiced their mental imagery under pressure, they actually felt vastly more confident and far less anxious about their abilities. But we really have to maintain perspective here, and it's perfectly captured by this quote from Brandon, one of the teachers. He said, "My life is educating kids. Their life, meaning the police, is learning how to protect us." It's a pretty sobering realization. While realistic training undeniably empowers educators and lowers their anxiety, we can't forget their primary identity, their passion, and their actual job is teaching. It's not combat. Which leaves us with this final, thought-provoking question to walk away with. How do we best support the mental preparedness and, honestly, the immense burden of modern educators? Whether they're relying on quiet mental imagery while setting up their reading nooks or actively participating in formal tactical programs, teachers today are carrying a psychological weight that generations before them literally never had to imagine. Recognizing that burden and finding ways to support their self-efficacy and their peace of mind, well, that's a conversation we absolutely all need to be having. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll catch you next time.